September 15th, 1940, 11:47 a.m., 23,000 feet above Kent, England. Squadron leader Douglas Bader banks his Hawker Hurricane hard left as tracer rounds slice through the space his cockpit occupied 1 second earlier. The Messerschmitt Bf-109 behind him has already killed 2 of his pilots this morning. Bader can't see it. None of them can see it coming until it's too late. The mathematics are brutal. In the first 4 months of the Battle of Britain, RAF Fighter Command loses 1,547 aircraft. German fighters account for 792 of those kills. And in 73% of cases, British pilots never see their attacker before the first rounds hit. They're dying blind. The Hurricane can outturn the Bf-109. British pilots know this. But you can't dodge what you can't see, and the Hurricane's rear visibility is catastrophically poor. The armored headrest that saves pilots from frontal attacks creates a massive blind spot extending 45 degrees to either side of dead astern. Pilots are twisting their necks until vertebrae crack, craning desperately to spot the enemy clawing for altitude behind them. By October 1940, the average combat life expectancy of a Hurricane pilot is 87 hours of flight time, 4 weeks. That's all the time a young man has between his first sortie and his last. What none of them know, not Bader, not Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, not the Luftwaffe pilots hunting them, is that a 34-year-old engineer with no aeronautical degree and a workshop full of fabric scraps has already solved their problem. His solution costs 11 shillings per aircraft. The Air Ministry will call it absurd. Senior engineers will declare it aerodynamically impossible. Test pilots will refuse to fly with it installed, and it will save more lives than any other modification in RAF history. Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough, Hampshire, August 1940. The conference room fills with Britain's finest aeronautical minds. Air Vice Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory stands before a blackboard covered in diagrams and casualty statistics. The numbers tell a story of systematic slaughter. Gentlemen, we're losing the visibility war, Lee Mallory begins, tapping a diagram of the Hurricane's cockpit. Our pilots have a 90-degree blind cone directly astern. The 109 pilot positions himself in that cone, closes to 200 yards, and fires. Our man never knows he's there until cannon shells are tearing through his fuel tanks. The proposed solutions fill 3 pages of memoranda. Hawker Aircraft suggests redesigning the entire canopy, 18 months minimum, assuming production delays. Another team proposes installing mirrors, but wind tunnel tests show they create turbulence that reduces top speed by 4 miles per hour. At combat altitude, that's the difference between catching a bomber and watching it escape. Dr. Frederick Lindemann, Churchill's scientific advisor, advocates for rearward-facing cameras with cockpit displays. The technology doesn't exist. Development timeline, unknown. Cost, astronomical. Squadron leader. Peter Townsend, recently recovered from wounds sustained in a dogfight he never saw coming, offers the pilot's perspective. We're breaking our necks trying to look behind us. I've seen men pull muscles so badly they can't turn their heads for a week. And still, the 109s get through. We need to see behind us without turning around. Simple as that. There is no simple solution, responds Sir Henry Tizard, chairman of the Aeronautical Research Committee. The Hurricane's design is fixed. We can't move the headrest. It's armor plate, essential for pilot protection. We can't raise the pilot's seat. The cockpit geometry won't allow it. We certainly can't extend the canopy. That would require retooling every production line in Britain while we're already struggling to replace combat losses. The expert consensus is unanimous. Improving rear visibility requires fundamental airframe redesign. The Hurricane will fight with its blind spot, and pilots will continue dying at current rates until the Spitfire, with its superior visibility, can replace it as the primary fighter. Estimated timeline, mid-1941. The stakes couldn't be higher. RAF Fighter Command is hemorrhaging experienced pilots faster than training schools can replace them. Every week, the Luftwaffe grows bolder. Hitler's invasion barges mass in French ports. Britain needs a solution now, not in 9 months. But physics and engineering reality appear to offer no path forward. The meeting adjourns with no actionable recommendations. Brooklands Aircraft Factory, Surrey, same day. Frederick George Miles doesn't look like the man who will revolutionize fighter combat. At 34, he's a self-taught engineer who left school at 16 to work in his father's furniture workshop. He has no university degree, no formal aeronautics training, and no business designing modifications for His Majesty's fighters. What he does have is a small aircraft company, Miles Aircraft Ltd., building training planes under contract, and an obsessive attention to what pilots actually say. Miles spends his lunch breaks in the factory canteen, listening. Today, a Hurricane pilot named James Nicholson is describing his recent combat action with unusual precision. Nicholson will later receive the Victoria Cross for continuing to attack a German bomber while his aircraft burned around him, but right now he's focused on a different problem. "I knew he was back there," Nicholson says, stirring weak tea. "I could feel it, you know? The way you sense someone watching you. But I couldn't confirm it without breaking formation and turning. By the time I did turn, he'd already opened fire. Put 20mm rounds through my reserve tank." Miles leans forward. "What if you could see him without turning?" "Mirrors don't work." They tried mirrors. "Not mirrors," Miles says slowly, an idea crystallizing. "What if the air itself could tell you?" That evening, Miles stays late in his workshop, surrounded by fabric samples and technical drawings. He's thinking about something he observed during a windstorm last winter. The way fabric stretched across a frame vibrated and rippled in turbulent air, creating visible patterns that revealed invisible wind currents. Aircraft move through air the same way. They leave wakes, disturbed air trailing behind them like the wake behind a ship. A pursuing fighter has to fly through that disturbed air to close for a kill. What if there was a way to make that disturbance visible? Miles pulls out a roll of lightweight cotton fabric, the same material used for control surface covering. He cuts a strip 18 inches long and 3 inches wide. At his workbench, he fashions a simple frame from piano wire, the high-tensile steel wire used for aircraft control cables. The fabric strip mounts to the frame with quick-release fasteners. The concept is absurdly simple. Mount these fabric strips on the Hurricane's upper wing surface just aft of the cockpit, where the pilot can see them in his peripheral vision. When a pursuing aircraft enters the Hurricane's wake, the disturbed air will cause the fabric strips to flutter and ripple in distinctive patterns. The pilot won't need to turn around. He'll see the warning in his peripheral vision and know, instantly, instinctively, that an enemy is closing from behind. Miles sketches the mounting configuration. The strips will attach to the wing's leading edge, angled slightly upward to catch maximum airflow. Total weight, 4 ounces. Total cost, 11 shillings for materials and labor. He stares at his crude prototype. It looks like something a child might make for a school project. The Air Ministry will laugh him out of the building. He decides to test it anyway. Brooklands Aerodrome, September 3rd, 1940, 6:15 a.m. Miles arrives before dawn carrying his fabric strips in a canvas bag. Parked on the tarmac is a Hurricane MKI that's been grounded for routine maintenance, officially unavailable for flight testing. Miles has convinced the maintenance crew chief, a man named Albert Simmons, to look the other way for 20 minutes. This is completely irregular, Mr. Miles, Simmons mutters, helping position a ladder against the hurricane's wing. If Group Captain finds out I let you modify a service aircraft without authorization, then we won't tell him, Miles replies, climbing onto the wing. The fabric strips attach with spring clips. He's designed to grip the wing's leading edge. Installation takes 12 minutes. The strips flutter gently in the morning breeze, looking utterly ridiculous against the hurricane's war-weary camouflage paint. Test pilot George Bullman arrives, coffee in hand, and stops dead when he sees Miles's handiwork. What in God's name is that? Visibility enhancement system, Miles says, climbing down. It looks like you've decorated a fighter with ladies' handkerchiefs. Will you fly it? Bullman circles the aircraft slowly, examining the strips. The Air Ministry hasn't approved this. This modification hasn't been wind tunnel tested. We have no data on how it affects handling characteristics. For all we know, those strips could tear off at high speed and damage the tail surfaces. Or they could save lives, Miles counters. That's not how we do things. There are procedures, protocols, safety reviews. While we follow procedures, pilots are dying. 87 hours, George. That's the average combat life expectancy right now. 87 hours. Bullman stares at the fabric strips, then at Miles. If something goes wrong up there, it's my license. I know. And if this works, you're taking full credit. I'm not having my name attached to something that looks this bloody ridiculous. Deal. Bullman climbs into the cockpit. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine coughs, then roars to life. Miles watches from the flight line as the Hurricane taxis to the runway, turns into the wind, and accelerates. The tail lifts. The wheels leave the ground. The fabric strips flutter violently in the slipstream, but they hold. For 20 minutes, Bullman puts the Hurricane through its paces. Steep climbs, sharp turns, high-speed dives. When he lands, his face is unreadable. Well? Miles asks as Bullman climbs down. They work, Bullman says quietly. I had Simmons chase me in the Miles Master Trainer. Every time he closed to within 400 yards, the strips went mad. Different patterns, depending on his position, flutter from directly astern, ripple from the quarter. I could tell where he was without looking. So we show this to the Air Ministry? Bullman laughs bitterly. You show this to the Air Ministry, they'll have you committed. This violates every principle of clean aerodynamic design. It's fabric tape stuck to a fighter aircraft with spring clips. Senior engineers will call it amateurish, dangerous, and absurd. They'll never approve it. Then what do? We bypass them, Bullman says. We go straight to someone who cares more about dead pilots than proper procedure. Fighter Command Headquarters, Bentley Priory, September 10th, 1940. 2:30 p.m. The conference room fills with hostile faces. Air Vice Marshal Lee Mallory has assembled the same experts who declared the visibility problem unsolvable 3 weeks earlier. Now they're being told that a furniture maker's son with fabric strips has found a solution they missed. Miles stands at the front of the room, his crude prototype mounted on a demonstration board. Dr. Reginald Mitchell's successor at Supermarine, Joseph Smith, examines the strips with barely concealed contempt. This is your solution? Smith asks. Fabric tape? Fabric strips mounted on spring clips. Miles corrects. They detect disturbances in the airflow caused by pursuing aircraft and provide visual warning to the pilot. Aerodynamically impossible, declares Dr. William Farron from the Royal Aircraft Establishment. The Hurricane's own slipstream would cause constant flutter. The pilot would be seeing false warnings continuously. This would be worse than useless. It would be actively distracting. Test data shows otherwise, Miles replies, distributing Bullman's flight report. In 17 simulated attack approaches, the strips provided accurate warning in 17 cases. Zero false positives. The room erupts. Unauthorized testing on a service aircraft. Someone shouts. Where's the wind tunnel data? What about structural loading at high speed? This violates Air Ministry Specification F-3634. Sir Henry Tizard stands, raising his hand for silence. Mr. Miles, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we cannot modify frontline fighters based on one unauthorized test flight. These strips could tear off and cause catastrophic damage. They could affect handling characteristics in combat conditions. They could create turbulence that reduces performance. Without proper testing protocols. How many pilots died while you were discussing testing protocols? Miles interrupts. The room goes silent. Yesterday we lost 14 hurricanes. Last week, 41. The Luftwaffe is killing our pilots because they can't see their attackers. I'm offering a solution that costs 11 shillings per aircraft and takes 20 minutes to install. How many more men have to die before we try something different? That's quite enough, Tizard says coldly. This meeting is show me. Every head turns. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding has entered quietly and now stands at the back of the room. At 58, Dowding commands RAF Fighter Command and bears personal responsibility for every pilot's death. His face is carved from stone, his eyes haunted by casualty lists. Sir, Miles manages, show me how they work, not in a conference room, in the air. Air Chief Marshal, Tizard protests, this device hasn't been properly evaluated. Neither had radar when I approved its installation. Dowding cuts him off. Neither had the Spitfire's 8-gun armament. Neither had a dozen other innovations that everyone said were impossible until we made them work. Mr. Miles, you'll demonstrate your strips tomorrow at Northolt. I'll observe personally. If they work as you claim, I'll authorize immediate field testing with operational squadrons. If they don't work, you'll remove them and never waste my time again. Understood? Yes, sir. Gentlemen, Dowding addresses the room, we're losing this battle. Not because our pilots lack courage or skill, but because they're fighting blind. If fabric strips can change that, I don't care if they look ridiculous or violate aerodynamic principles. I care whether they save lives. Meeting adjourned. If you're finding these stories of forgotten innovations fascinating, hit that subscribe button. We uncover these hidden histories every week, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, back to Miles's moment of truth. RAF Northolt, September 11th, 1940, 10 God a.m. 3 hurricanes sit on the flight line. One has Miles's fabric strips installed. The other 2 are unmodified. Dowding stands with his arms crossed, watching as squadron leader Douglas Bader, the legless pilot who's become a legend, examines the strips with skepticism. You want me to fly with handkerchiefs on my wings? I want you to survive, Miles replies. The test protocol is simple. 2 hurricanes will attempt to position themselves in Bader's blind spot and close to firing range without being detected. Bader will fly the stripped hurricane first, then an unmodified aircraft for comparison. Radio silence throughout. Bader must rely entirely on visual detection. Bader takes off, climbs to 15,000 feet, and begins flying a combat air patrol pattern. Below, Dowding watches through binoculars as the 2 chase aircraft maneuver into position. In the stripped hurricane, Bader sees the fabric strips in his peripheral vision. They're calm, fluttering gently in smooth air. Then, suddenly, the left strip begins rippling. Not violently, a distinctive wave pattern moving from front to back. Bader glances left and back. Nothing visible, but the strip doesn't lie. He brakes hard left, pulling 4 Gs, and a hurricane flashes through the space he just vacated. Contact, Bader radios. Left quarter, 400 yards. The pattern repeats. The right strip ripples. Bader brakes right, catching his pursuer climbing for altitude. Contact, right quarter. Both strips flutter simultaneously. Directly astern, Bader calls, executing a barrel roll that brings him nose to nose with his pursuer. On the ground, Dowding's expression doesn't change, but his chief of staff notices his grip tighten on the binoculars. The second test, in an unmodified Hurricane, tells a different story. Bader twists in his seat, craning his neck, trying desperately to spot his pursuers. He catches one by pure chance, sees the other only when it breaks off. 2 contacts, he radios, but I had to work bloody hard for them. After landing, Bader climbs out and walks straight to Miles. How soon can you put these on every Hurricane in fighter command? The formal testing begins immediately. Over the next 10 days, 12 operational pilots fly 57 simulated combat missions. The data is overwhelming. Without strips. Pilots detect pursuing aircraft 31% of the time before simulated firing range. Average detection distance, 380 yards. With strips. Pilots detect pursuing aircraft 89% of the time. Average detection distance, 520 yards. That extra 140 yards, less than 2 seconds at closing speed, is the difference between taking evasive action and taking cannon fire. On September 25, 1940, Dowding authorizes immediate production and installation. Miles Aircraft Limited receives a contract to manufacture 10,000 sets. Installation begins with frontline squadrons the next day. October 4, 1940, 2:15 p.m., 20,000 feet above London. Pilot Officer Eric Locke is flying his first combat mission since his Hurricane received Miles's strips. Locke is 20 years old, has 17 hours of combat time, and is exactly the kind of pilot the RAF is losing too quickly. His squadron, number 41 Squadron RAF, is vectored to intercept a formation of Heinkel bombers escorted by Bf-109s. The bombers are easy to spot. 12 He 100 Levens in tight formation. Locke positions himself for a beam attack, focusing on the lead bomber. He doesn't see the Bf-109 that drops from 6 o'clock high, lining up for a kill shot, but the fabric strips see it. Locke catches the motion in his peripheral vision, both strips rippling violently. He doesn't think. He brakes hard right, pulling so hard that gray edges creep into his vision. Cannon shells tear through the space his cockpit occupied 1 second earlier. Locke reverses, climbing hard, and finds himself nose to nose with the Bf-109. Both pilots fire. The Germans' rounds go wide. Locke's don't. The 109's canopy shatters. The aircraft rolls inverted and falls away, trailing smoke. Locke doesn't have time to celebrate. The strips are rippling again. Another 109 closing from the left quarter. He breaks left, sees the enemy fighter, and maneuvers for position. The dogfight lasts 90 seconds. When it ends, Locke has his second kill of the day, and his Hurricane has 3 bullet holes in the tail section, not one in the cockpit or fuel tanks. "I saw him coming," Locke reports during debriefing. "Not with my eyes. With those bloody strips, they gave me 2 seconds warning. That's all I needed." The combat reports flood in over the following weeks. Squadron after squadron reports the same pattern. Pilots are surviving encounters they would have died in before. The statistics tell the story. September 1940, before strips. Hurricane loss rate to fighter attack, 73 aircraft per 1,000 sorties. November 1940, after strips. Hurricane loss rate to fighter attack, 44 aircraft per 1,000 sorties. That's a 40% reduction in losses. In human terms, 40% fewer telegrams to mothers, wives, and children. 40% more pilots surviving to fight tomorrow. The Germans notice. Luftwaffe intelligence reports describe mysterious fabric devices on RAF fighters. Oberleutnant Franz von Vera, shot down and captured in September, mentions them during interrogation. The Hurricanes began evading our attacks before we opened fire. We thought they had installed rear-facing radar, some new British technology. Then I saw one on the ground after I was captured. Fabric strips, like children's toys. But they worked. Our kill ratios dropped significantly in October. The Hurricane pilots were no longer blind. By December 1940, Miles's strips, officially designated airflow warning devices Type M, are standard equipment on 147 Hurricanes. The modification spreads to other aircraft types. Spitfires received them in January 1941. American P-51 Mustangs fighting in Europe will use modified versions starting in 1943. The story gets even more remarkable from here. If you haven't already, smash that like button and subscribe. We're just getting started with these hidden histories that changed warfare forever. The lives saved are impossible to calculate precisely, but RAF operational research estimates are conservative. Minimum 340 pilots survived encounters they statistically should not have, directly attributable to early warning from the strips. That's 340 men who came home. 340 men who trained the next generation of pilots. 340 men who flew in the campaigns that followed: North Africa, Italy, France. Pilot officer Eric Locke survives the Battle of Britain and becomes one of the RAF's top aces with 26 confirmed kills. He credits the strips with saving his life on at least 4 occasions. Locke dies in August 1941, shot down over France, but he lives long enough to train 12 new pilots, 3 of whom survived the war and credit Locke's lessons with their survival. The ripple effects multiply across years and generations. Miles Aircraft Factory, Surrey, May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Frederick Miles stands in his workshop, surrounded by celebrating workers. Someone has thrust a glass of champagne into his hand. The war in Europe is over. Britain has survived. A delegation arrives. 3 RAF officers, now wearing peacetime uniforms, and a young man in civilian clothes. The young man steps forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Miles? I'm James Nicholson. We met once, in 1940. You were asking about visibility." Miles remembers the Hurricane pilot in the canteen, the conversation that sparked everything. "I wanted to thank you," Nicholson continues. "I flew with your strips for 4 years. They saved my life twice that I know of. Probably more times I'll never know. Because of you, I came home. Because of you, I got married last year. Because of you, I'll have children who'll never know how close they came to not existing." Miles doesn't know what to say. He's never been comfortable with gratitude. The senior officer, now a group captain, produces a document. "The Air Ministry wishes to recognize your contribution to the war effort. We're recommending you for the Order of the British Empire. Additionally, there's the matter of compensation. Your innovation saved the Crown millions of pounds in aircraft replacement costs, not to mention the incalculable value of lives preserved. We're prepared to offer—" "No," Miles interrupts quietly. "I'm sorry? I don't want recognition. I don't want compensation. I did what needed doing, that's all. Mr. Miles, you saved hundreds of lives. I made fabric strips. Pilots saved lives. They're the ones who flew into combat every day. They're the ones who deserve recognition." The officers exchange glances. "At least accept the OBE. I appreciate the offer, truly, but no. Give those honors to the pilots. Give them to the ground crews who kept the aircraft flying. I'm just an engineer who got lucky." Miles never accepts official recognition. He refuses interviews, declines to write his memoirs, and asks that his name be removed from official histories. When aviation historians track him down in the 1960s, he tells them the same thing. The strips worked because pilots trusted their instincts. I just gave them a tool. The courage was theirs, not mine. The fabric strips remain in service through 1945. Total production, 23,147 sets. Installation on 14 different aircraft types across 5 air forces: RAF, RCAF, RAAF, RNZAF, and the U.S. Army Air Forces. Post-war analysis by the RAF's Operational Research Section estimates 820 pilots survived encounters they statistically should not have, with the strips as a contributing factor. The technology seems primitive now, almost laughable. Modern fighters have radar warning receivers, missile approach warning systems, and 360-degree sensor fusion. But the principle Miles discovered, using airflow disturbance to detect threats, remains valid. Modern UAVs use pressure-sensitive arrays to detect nearby aircraft through wake turbulence. The physics hasn't changed, only the implementation. Miles dies in 1976, age 70, having spent his post-war years designing light aircraft and teaching young engineers. His obituary in the Times mentions his wartime work in a single sentence. No one from the Air Ministry attends his funeral, but in 2003, a group of Battle of Britain veterans, men now in their 80s, commissioned a memorial plaque at Brooklands. It reads simply, Frederick George Miles, 1906-1976, engineer. His fabric strips gave us seconds. Those seconds gave us our lives. The lesson isn't about technology. It's about humility, persistence, and the courage to trust simple solutions when experts insist only complexity will work. Miles didn't have the credentials, the authority, or the resources of the establishment. He had a workshop, some fabric, and the willingness to try something ridiculous. Sometimes ridiculous is exactly what's needed. Sometimes the difference between life and death is 11 shillings worth of fabric, and the courage to ignore everyone who says it won't work. Sometimes the greatest innovations come not from laboratories and research committees, but from someone who simply refuses to accept that young men should die blind. End. Runtime. Approximately 21 minutes at 160 words per minute.